Hey everybody, Arthur here, and this is the second installation in a series of videos where I talk about my master's thesis and final year project in architecture. So if you're familiar with that first video, and if you haven't watched it yet, I recommend it. It'll give you background on this one. I essentially outlined the fundamental concepts and sort of the why for my whole project. Now the idea is to intervene and make a comic book style narrative about a neighborhood in Tokyo called Koenji. From the period where I started making that video in October until now, a ton of things have happened. And so I wanted to kind of make this video in a more candid format to bridge the gap between then and now, as well as sort of show my process throughout the whole thing. And as you'll tell by the haircut, you'll sort of be able to see with the future videos coming out what time period I'm filming this video at now. But that's spoilers, so we'll get into that later. Without further ado, let's get into it, and I'm going to tell you the story. So the period where I began my research, I didn't really understand where I wanted to go. I had a vague idea. I had like a question, which I mentioned in the first video, and I had some core concepts, but I didn't really have like a direction. And especially since I'm not native to the French academic system, I didn't really know how exactly to proceed. So I kind of just did the brute force approach. I did a ton of research. I started reading documents and looking things up on Google. But one of the most key components of my research was watching videos. And one of the most instrumental videos to my research was a video by the B1M, where they essentially talk about Tokyo's disaster prevention systems. Now, in that video, they list a bunch of sources. And in one of the sources, there's an article with the mention of a professor named Hidenobu Jinnai, which I mentioned also in the first video. And this guy essentially is an expert on urban morphology, a bunch of technical stuff, and also Tokyo's rivers. And as I went deeper into that rabbit hole, I realized more and more that this professor was somehow going to be essential to my research. And he is. But telling you beyond that is a bit spoiler, so I'm not going to get too much into it. But he is a recurring character. But basically, every time I came back to the professor, it was apparent that I was getting much more knowledgeable on the subject, but he kind of made it clear that I didn't really have anything concrete with regards to the thesis nor the project. I had no working theory, and I had no idea what kind of projects I wanted to do. So in order to kind of create progress, I started to do what I know how to do best, which is to draw. And so I essentially started to draw everything with regards to the research to kind of showcase my progress and also show, accumulate this sort of drawn material that I knew at some point would pay off. Part of that thought process was to create a sort of magazine compilation of, how I was doing my research, where my research was taking me, and sort of create these digestible volumes that could somehow show that I was getting somewhere. To that end, I also spent a lot of time making a bunch of maps which would become useless because I have no idea how to use QGIS. And I really didn't enjoy using QGIS, which is probably why they ended up being useless. But nevertheless, I kind of continued on this path. And, all the while I was sort of doing all this, I set up a call with my previous internship instructor, who is a Dutch guy, who is also an architect, urbanist, and also lives exactly in the neighborhood where I'm doing this project. So who better to talk to than to my old internship instructor? So I give him a call, and he kind of like unlocks a new step of my journey because we have a super interesting conversation. He tells me about a lot of the things going on in Koenji, namely some of the things I talked about in the first video, such as that old buildings with charm and that sort of define the neighborhood are being replaced by new sort of prefabricated residences or businesses that are essentially denaturing the neighborhood. He was essentially describing something that I would later find out to be called the urban metabolism, which we'll talk about in future videos, but it's an important bookmark. After all was said and done, I basically took away 3 important things from that call. First of all, it was this recurring trend throughout not only Koenji, but also the rest of Tokyo of these replacing buildings. Second of all, it was essentially how do I tie this all into a story? And then third of all, I was going to have to go back to Japan because there were too many things that I just didn't have in front of me that I needed to have in front of me in order to know what to do next. And this is, around the time where I start making that first video, but also it's around the time where this sort of comic narrative starts to take shape. But it doesn't take shape at as a comic specifically, it takes shape as a sort of unfoldable, like what a leporello is. It's essentially like this unfoldable, continuous sheet of paper that can serve as the basis for a narrative. So I basically, through that leporello, I was essentially observing and giving myself leads and exploring the paths that I could take to eventually develop the story that I was looking for. And I would spend hundreds of hours, in total drawing this thing. And at some point, I had to kind of show for my work. After winter break, we had this sort of delivery date. So a date where I had to turn in, my progress on the project. And, I display everything and I go through my research, everything that I'd sort of been doing for the past couple months. And the reaction from the professors was essentially like, you have a lot of research here and you have a lot of work done, but you still don't have a concrete theory, nor do you have a specific topic, and nor do you have like a set of concrete projects you can do. And so that kind of made it feel like a flop, even though it wasn't. It was sort of like a redirecting moment for me. And at that point, it became, 100% sure I was going to have to go back to Japan. So essentially, I decided to go for broke, and I bought my tickets to go do a research trip to Japan. And that's essentially all I'll say for this video, because anything further and we'll be getting into spoiler territory. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was somehow insightful to you on your journey as an architect. And I'll be soon updating you with the latest installments in this journey. And I hope you subscribe and like and do all the extra stuff. And I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.